I'm just trying to decide if I'm comfortable even talking about that.
This one's wife. Why do people comment on her? The Empath. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Thousands of people consult with me. They do so because they want help from me, the expert, to unravel what has gone on in relation to a problem that they have with a particular relationship. Most often, this is a romantic relationship, but commonly includes familial relationships and working relationships also. Less common, but they're there, are issues with friends and neighbours. In order to assist these people, the thousands through consultation and the millions that have watched my videos and read my blog articles, the starting point is to understand who is it that you're dealing with. To achieve that, and to help people understand within the context of narcissism and psychopathy, I utilize 4 foundation classifications when it comes to people. We determine, is that individual an empath, a normal, a narcissistic individual who is not a narcissist, or are they a narcissist or psychopath? Psychopath is far less common, and invariably the focus is on narcissist. By dividing people up into those 4 classifications, all of them having differences, but also some similarities, it enables that individual to make sense of the behaviour that they are experiencing. Now, human beings are both basic and complex, but dividing them up into these 4 categorizations is a very useful starting point to enable a person to then understand what options are available to them with regard to resolving the problem. For instance, if you learn you're involved with a narcissist, there's no point trying to appeal to that person's better reason, to their sense of decency, because there isn't one, and you'd be going on a fool's errand. Whereas if the problem is with someone that's a normal, we are able to ascertain that there may be some other condition alongside that is causing the issue, or it's linked to a diminution of their emotional empathy, which means that there are more options available to try and resolve the dispute. Thus, it is very important to understand what is the person that you're dealing with. Unsurprisingly, many people are involved with narcissists, otherwise why would they be trying to speak to me about it? But with regard to these classifications, it also is interesting to consider those in the context of what drives people to comment about this one's wife. There are numerous YouTube channels, some more established, others who have come more recently to the party, that create videos commenting about various different aspects of this one's wife's life and interactions and dynamic. There are those that undertake deep dive investigative works. There are those that join the dots together with some degree of investigation into the background circumstances. Others comment upon information that's in the public domain and provide their own personal views about them. Others utilize parody. As you know, I talk about this one's wife vis-a-vis her narcissism and the dynamic that she has with other people, to explain that narcissistic dynamic with some snark and parody thrown in alongside in order to entertain. There are others who essentially gossip about this one's wife, and they're perfectly entitled to do so. There are people that create all of these videos, numerous channels, but there are blogs about her, people commenting on social media, people writing newspaper articles, people creating broadcast news about her. Given the fact that she is, in essence, a relatively mundane character, why is it that so many people feel motivated to want to comment? I'm not just talking about the people that comment below the line or observe on comment section on YouTube or Facebook, etc. But the actual content creators, why is it that those individuals are driven to want to spend what could be significant amounts of their own personal time digging up information, scrutinizing it, considering it, cross-referencing it, then maybe writing a script for a video, or at least spending the time to consider what it is they're going to talk about and then create that video, organize thumbnails, etc., etc., etc. What drives that person to want to do that? Those of you who have been enjoying my In Conversation series know that I've spoken to a number of content creators who talk about This One's Wife, individuals that come from what is loosely known as the Megxit community. And I've sought to elicit some of their motivations for why they do as they do. But I thought it would be helpful for you to understand, based upon my observations of both these classifications of people and those that create the content, to understand what's driving them to spend this time to comment on This One's Wife. And I'm going to do so that it helps you understand more about these different classifications of individuals. Because interestingly, across those that comment about This One's Wife, there are those who are empaths, there are those who are normals, there are some narcissistic individuals, and yes, there are some narcissists that talk about This One's Wife. You're listening to one now. Therefore, it helps you understand more about those classifications and the motivations associated with those individuals, whilst linked to a topic that many of you are heavily invested in and interested in, namely This One's Wife. Accordingly, I'm going to start off with the empath. Why would an empath want to spend time commenting about a narcissist? Purists of mine would think breach of no contact. You're thinking about, you're talking about, you're taking action in relation to a narcissist. That isn't good. And there is force in such an argument. Yet there are out there empathic commentators who are motivated to spend reasonable proportions of their personal time researching, looking for information, commenting, and creating content about This One's Wife. What makes them do it? Well, first of all, an empath has considerable emotional empathy for a wide range of people, often people that they may never have met, that they have no interaction with. But the scope of their emotional empathy is such that they feel for those individuals. They understand the situation they find themselves in. And therefore, one important driver of the behaviour is emotional empathy that is being felt for those affected by This One's Wife's behaviour. For example, those who found her behaviour towards the late Queen Elizabeth II and the late Duke of Edinburgh offensive, that they saw it, for instance, as elder abuse. There are those that think her treatment of Harry is despicable. Notwithstanding the problematic behaviours he engages in, there are those that recognise that he is a victim of a narcissist, and that has affected the way that he has behaved, with severe consequences for him. There are those who have emotional empathy for the Waleses, both in terms of William and Catherine and what they have endured, and also the children, particularly Charlotte, who was allegedly bullied by This One's Wife. There are those that feel for King Charles and Queen Camilla, for Thomas Markle Sr., for Thomas Markle Jr. and Samantha Markle, in terms of how they have been treated by This One's Wife. So a key driver for those who comment is the fact that they feel emotional empathy for a range of people who have been affected by This One's Wife. This can also expand to the general public at large, that they don't like the way that she has treated, for instance, tarring the citizens of the United Kingdom as racists. Fine-tuning that is the nature of empathic traits. Now, an empathic person has both empathic and narcissistic traits. Their narcissistic traits might be few in number and quite weak, sometimes greater in number and quite strong. but they're always outranked by the strength of the empathic traits. Empathic people have extensive empathic traits, and they tend to be strong, very strong, extremely strong in nature. There are 3 empathic traits which commonly are those which affect those who are empaths that comment about this one's wife. The first is the truth seeker trait. Empaths love to get to the truth of the matter. It runs through their core. They're like a dog with a bone. They want to understand by getting to the truth of somebody's behaviour. Why have they done what they've done? What really happened? What's going on? And they also want people to understand their truth also. It's important, not from a self-absorbed fashion, but from a getting the message out there approach, that the empathic person wants to be heard. Thus, their truth seeker trait propels them to want to get to the truth and to share the truth also. With this one's wife, those empathic commentators essentially find their truth seeker trait offended by the fact that she regularly distributes misinformation. Furthermore, there are so many things about this one's wife which are cloaked in mystery, that have been obscured, that the smoke and mirrors has been applied. For instance, has she been married 3 times? Was she a yacht girl? What's the story with the pregnancies? And other matters besides. Thus, wanting to get to the truth of the story of this one's wife and wanting to share it, alongside looking to counter the misinformation which this one's wife regularly engages in, means that this one's wife's behaviour offends that truth seeker trait, and that is a motivation for empathic commentators to create the content that they do about this one's wife. The second empathic trait is that of decency, doing the right thing. Essentially, this one's wife regularly engages in indecent behaviour. She's grasping and grifting. She wears inappropriate clothing, says inappropriate things, doesn't recognise boundaries, behaves in an impolite fashion, and thus that offends the notion of decency. And those empathic individuals want to highlight this indecent behaviour, not to shame, not that this one's wife experiences shame, but that's not the motivation, but to demonstrate to the wider world this behaviour is not right, it's not acceptable, it's not proper, it's not appropriate. The third empathic trait that is invariably a driver for the empath is a sense of justice. Empaths are big on fairness. It's not right, it's not fair, it's not proper. They have a keen sense of justice, that where somebody offends, they ought to be accountable for that offence, that they ought to receive some form of correction, that there might be some form of retribution, even punishment. It isn't the case that the empath is all holiness and light and rises above everything. An empath can very much want someone to experience the firm smack of justice, and this is particularly strong in relation to this one's wife. She's seen as a fraud, a deceiver, and a liar, and therefore ought to be brought to justice, not necessarily in the sense of a criminal conviction, but the empath wouldn't necessarily shy away from that, but to be answerable for her behaviours, even if it's just to receive public condemnation, for her to have some form of comeuppance, in the way that she has grifted and social climbed, that her to have a fall from grace. Ordinarily, an empath wouldn't want to visit that upon anybody, but with an offender, such as this one's wife, this offends the keen sense of justice that the empath has and motivates them to want to expose this one's wife's behaviour and also to seek her comeuppance. That is why certain commentators continue to speak about her and it's also a considerable driver in relation to those empathic viewers and readers who keep on watching and reading about what's going on because they want to see this one's wife get her just desserts. They think that that is only right because of their keen sense of justice. So that's the three empathic traits which act as a driver. There are also narcissistic traits that play a part in this, but they are not as significant drivers as the emotional empathy and the empathic traits when it comes to an empath. You will see in due course, when I talk about the other classifications, how the narcissistic traits become the more prevailing drivers of behaviour. But in the context of an empath, because empaths do, as I mentioned earlier on, have narcissistic traits, anger is one which can be a driver. Anger at the way that this one's wife has behaved, anger at the way that she treats people, anger at the way that she doesn't care, anger at the way that she seems to get away with things. Argumentativeness. The fact is that, driven by the truth-seeker trait in tandem with argumentativeness, the empathic individual will often want that person to recognise that they're doing wrong. Of course, this is futile when it comes to a narcissist, but often the empath fails to recognise that as a consequence of emotional thinking. They're driven to want to argue the position in relation to making that offender see the error of their ways. In some part, there are those empathic commentators that believe that this one's wife sees their material, and in part, they address her in that regard with the expectation that she'll sit up and take notice and quite possibly will do something about it. But more usually, this argumentativeness as a narcissistic trait in relation to an empathic person comes out in respect of the arguments that take place with the supporters of this one's wife. Resentment. This narcissistic trait is also a driver, again to a lesser extent, as a consequence of the fact that the empathic individual resents the fact that this one's wife behaves as she does and gets away with it. Furthermore, defiance. I am not allowing myself to remain silent in the face of these behaviours. I need the world to know that I disapprove of this one's wife. And thus you see that a range of traits, both empathic and narcissistic, come together to motivate these empathic commentators to create content so that they talk about, repeatedly, this one's wife. The empathic traits, of course, being far stronger, are much more influencing than the narcissistic ones, but it's there also. Another aspect linked to the empath is that of distraction. For many empaths, the world can be an overwhelming place. The injustices, the horror of human behaviour, the difficulties that are exhibited, the sheer unfairness of people in the lottery of life is often quite upsetting to the empathic individual, and it can lead to a sense of impotence. It also can overwhelm the empath to the extent that they seek some form of respite from what goes on in the world, all of the evil that is conducted by certain types of human beings. Accordingly, utilising comment about this one's wife as a distraction, something fun and fluffy to engage in, a little bit of ridicule, is often a distraction for the empathic individual so that they don't have to face so much of the horror that takes place in the world. It is quite common for empathic people to react that way, seeking refuge in something else as a distraction. Accordingly, the main drivers for the empath in relation to why they spend time talking about this one's wife is their emotional empathy, their empathic traits, to a lesser extent their narcissistic traits, and also distraction. Those are the matters which tend to be at the heart of the driver, but there are some other influencing factors also. First of all, is a sense of camaraderie in a community. Those empathic commentators enjoy the exchange with other commentators. They enjoy the exchange of information, but moreover, they enjoy being part of what they see as a community, that it forges a friendship, that they have mutual interests in what they're talking about, but not only with other commentators, but also with their readers and viewers. That they enjoy that engagement that takes place because it fosters a sense of belonging, that everybody is pulling in the same direction, that they have a common aim with regard to what they want to achieve. And that sense of belonging and camaraderie is very much a motivating factor for an empath. There's also the fact that the empath does enjoy the feedback. As you know, the narcissist thrives on feedback because it's fuel. Empaths don't need fuel, but that doesn't mean that they don't like to be praised. Of course they do. Empaths deal with praise in differing ways. Many are slightly embarrassed to be praised, that they like to be praised, they want to be acknowledged, they don't want to be left out. But a simple acknowledgement will do. They don't need to go on stage and receive awards, for example. But empathic people enjoy being praised also, and therefore the positive feedback and compliments that they receive from their viewers and readers is important to them and acts as a motivating factor. Money is also an influencing factor because, in some instances, a reasonable amount of money can be made by those that are content creators. For the empathic individual, this is far from a major influence, but it is a factor and ought to be noted. Accordingly, when it comes to the empathic individual who is a content creator in relation to this one's wife, there are, as you've heard, a multiplicity of factors which drive their behaviour, but key is the issue of their emotional empathy, their empathic traits. Those are the biggest drivers in relation to their behaviour, and then to a lesser extent their narcissistic traits and distraction, and then sprinkled on top, if you will, is the enjoyment of camaraderie, positive feedback, and making some money out of it also. What are your views in relation to what I have explained to understand the empathic personality better, and also in relation to why people spend so much time talking about this one's wife? Remember, this is framed as against the empathic personality. There are other similar but also differing factors, as you will hear, in respect of the other classifications of individuals, the normals, the narcissistic but not narcissists, and the narcissist also. Do you think there are some other factors that affect the empathic personality to spend time commenting about this one's wife? If so, let me know in the comments section. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.